Welcome to Films and Stuff with your hosts, Pete Mitchell and Ethan Hunt.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Films and Stuff. I am Ethan, joined by a super enthusiastic, excited, bouncing out of his seat, Pete. Hey, Pete, what's up?
Not much, buddy. How are you?
Man, I'm great. And you know why I'm great today. Tell the audience what we've got on tap.
This week, we are finally going to talk about For All Mankind. Season 4 just kicked off. We're 2 episodes deep. We've got another 6 or 8 to go, whatever the final number is going to be. So we thought that we would go over a very quick and dirty recap of what happens in seasons 1, 2, and 3 so that we're all caught up. And we can talk a little bit about episodes 1 and 2 and about where we think the rest of season 4 is going.
First, may I just say, I know we haven't seen Michael Dorman, Gordo Stevens since season 2?
Yes.
But I miss Gordo. I have to say, the absence of Gordo and Karen Baldwin, who you know I have a crush on, I think that their absence really leaves a big void at the start of this season 4 because we've lost so many characters. And the characters that we've at least focused on for the first 2 episodes have not really captivated me the way the older cast has.
I would suggest, and I think you're absolutely right, because even though I hate Karen, I would suggest that those 2 characters were the ones who brought the most heart to the series. They were the ones who were not just the most flawed, but the ones whose flaws you could actually relate to probably more than anyone else's.
Yeah. Should we talk about where season 3 ended? I have to say, seasons 1, 2, and 3 have all ended in very, very spectacular fashion.
One of the things I like about For All Mankind is that each season wraps up its arcs quite tightly and neatly so that every season is an end to itself. So there's no cliffhangers going to the next season.
Yeah.
And what that does is it gives the writers the freedom, A, to do something completely narratively different every season. And B, there's no fear of, what happens in today's modern day where a show gets canceled mid-season or in between 2 seasons. You don't have any of that baggage with you. Mm-hmm. Just a quick recap. Season 1 was basically a race between the Russians and the Americans to set up a base on the moon.
That's right.
2 was a race between the Americans and the Russians having established bases, but to maintain their bases and, build up the lunar bases properly.
It was a territorial dispute.
That's right.
And it was based on the resources that they found in each side, claiming basically the mineral rights to them.
Yeah. 3 was then a race to Mars. And now we had a third participant. We had the Russians, we had the Americans, and then we had the private sector.
Helios. Season 2, we lost Gordo and Trace. We lost the couple at the end in what I still consider among the best season finales ever. I think we talked about it at length. Remember, they didn't play any music. They just kept it silent as they were kind of like running. I thought that was one of the most emotional, climactic endings and great character arcs for both of them as well, right?
Fantastic.
Season 3 installed high drama, both with kind of the 3-person race to get to Mars. We saw a lot of Earth drama with Karen trying to take over Helios and Danny kind of sabotaging everything on Mars itself. And then what For All Mankind, I think, has kind of become known for me, is what you mentioned, is every season ends in a very tight package. And then the first episode of the new season, they have kind of like this montage, right?
I love that you said that.
It's basically a montage where they take all these kind of like historical events and reimagine them with headlines and kind of like news clips or something that makes you be like, oh, that happened? Or no way, that's what an alternative history would have been like, or that person did that, or oh, I can't believe that. Every single one of those. And it's really worth watching slowly and pausing, because I've paused. When they show a newspaper article, it doesn't just say headline, blah, 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 blah. They've actually written an article. If you pause properly, the one I'll point out is Michael Jordan, right? Michael Jordan is on the Seattle Mariners.
Yeah.
And I paused it perfectly. And the article reads like someone actually took the time to write a baseball article about a fictitious game that allegedly happened in the past. The amount of effort and attention to detail I found was just like fantastic.
And that's another good point that you're raising, is that every season also at the end of it or at the very beginning, we see a time jump to a new era.
Yeah.
So season 1 was late 60s, early 70s. Season 2 was like 80s. Season 3 was 90s. And now season 4 is early 2000s. And I mean, we commented on that montage in season 2 and 3, but like one here was very good because Ellen Waverly has retired after successfully winning a second term as a gay lesbian president.
Yes.
Al Gore got elected, so you know that the controversy of the early 2000s doesn't happen. Right. So, you know, we're seeing a lot of these things. Michael Jordan apparently has an equally successful career as baseball. All these little things, they seem innocuous, but they do such a good job of world building in such a short amount of time. When we think of world building, I think one of the best movie examples of world building was Valerian and the Planet of 1,000 Worlds or something like that.
Yeah.
Besson?
Yes.
I can't even remember the name of the title.
Dane DeHaan.
It was such a random title, but they did such a wonderful job in that first 10 minutes where they showed that extended montage of how the International Space Station basically becomes this gigantic planet over decades and centuries and millennia. And it gives you an idea of the different planets and the different worlds and the different creatures. That allows you to immediately start the movie in minute 11 onwards with no breaks. There's no explanations required because the montage at the beginning does such a good job of explaining the world where we are today. And the same thing happens here. That montage at the beginning of episode 1 of season 4, fantastic world building. It takes everything we knew about seasons 1, 2, and 3. It takes the shocking events of the ending of season 3, buttons it up nicely into like this newspaper article and these like news clips, just so that we can say, hey, you know what? This may come up. And if it does, you know the same information that everybody in this world knows. And let's move on.
Yeah, I agree. And I also have to give a lot of credit because all the historical events that they identify, they're like adjacent to reality, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like Al Gore becoming president, it's not like Mick Jagger becomes president. It's not someone totally random becoming president. Like they take someone who like in one historical scenario lost. In this historical scenario, they won, right?
Yeah.
So I feel like what's incredible is that they're taking kind of historical events and they're just saying, almost like MCU style, if this was just one bifurcation over, what would the world look like if the cards had just fallen in a little bit of a different way?
If the coin flip was heads instead of tails or vice versa. That's literally all it is. It's a binary decision. We're not talking a roll of the dice. We're not talking a pick of a deck of cards. It's literally, okay, it was Gore v. Bush. Bush won in reality. What if Gore had won? Let's go from there. Essentially, that's the premise of this entire show, right? All the way back in season 1, the premise was, what if it was the Russians who got to the moon before the Americans? That's it.
They show like the parade in North Korea, how proud they are. Like, anyway, I agree. That exposition I thought was just a fantastic opening, and it accomplishes so much.
Yeah.
It totally emotionally moves you on from the end of season 3. It gives you so much background in terms of where we are with season 4. I would guess, although I'm not sure, that this is probably going to be the last season, only because I think the ability to age some of these folks has kind of reached its apex,
Yeah, let's talk about that. So that's a really good
Yeah.
point you're saying. So when we saw the first season, I remember reading an article between seasons 1 and 2 where the
Yeah.
showrunner said that this was a 7-season arc.
Whoa.
And I said, that's great. But immediately after season 2 ended, we realized that if they were going on this, every season is going to be a new decade, you have to introduce new characters.
Yeah. Joel Kinnaman, Ed Baldwin, is already dramatically make-upped.
Plus, I mean,
Yeah.
they've got a huge budget, but man, his makeup does not look convincing as an old man. Danielle, I think she looks great. Joel Kinnaman,
Yeah.
I'm not a huge fan of the way he looks in his old man makeup. I don't think that's a true to life representation.
I have to say, I don't disagree with you. Watch me sit on this fence. I don't disagree with you, but watching it, I didn't really have like an objection.
Right.
I thought like, wow, he's dramatically older, but I didn't really object to it. But you're right. I wouldn't say that that is the most becoming or realistic view. And Margot, by the way, Ren Schmidt,
Right.
doesn't seem to have aged at all, except she's got an even
Gray
worse
hair
haircut,
and
right?
she looks stiff.
Yeah. So there we are. What did you think with dramatic anticipation? We watched episode 1. How did you feel during and after episode 1? Was it scratching the itch that you had?
Yes and no. Now let me sit on that fence. In the sense that I was super excited to see where they go with this.
Yeah.
Right. And it was a pleasure to see everyone.
Mhm.
Also, there was a little bit of catharsis in seeing Margot kind of not being happy in
Yeah.
Moscow. She's living this depressing life
Yeah.
where she's obviously being stalked by someone in Alada from the Russian government, etc.
Can we just take a moment to recap why Margot is in this situation? Is that she had some type of love affair with her Russian counterpart, was giving away secrets about the US technology capabilities. Alida was almost at the cusp of catching on and possibly even reporting it. Margot, knowing that it was only a matter of time until she was outed and probably imprisoned for espionage, somehow, and this is what's great about the show, it leads it to our imagination, basically said, hey, everyone probably thinks I'm already dead. I'm just going to call my buddy Sergey and get him to fly me, and I'll just go live in Russia and I'll just kind of go work for their space agency, and at least I won't spend the rest of my life in a US prison for espionage, right?
Yeah.
And then what we see is that she's living a very modest, like Moscovian lifestyle, which, let me just say, given the way that this show has kind of reimagined history, it would have been really interesting to see Moscow be a little bit more
Metropolitan and high tech. Yeah.
Yeah, and she's kind of like living like the good life in Moscow, but instead they've kind of gone back, and the episode is called Glasnost.
Yeah.
She's kind of gone back to what you think of as the Cold War Moscow, where she's got a very limited budget, very limited amenities. She's living a very frugal and seemingly boring lifestyle. She goes to the bakery, she sits in the park, she reads the newspaper. And the one thing that we kind of learn is that she probably rightfully believed that she was going to have a seat at the table of the Russian Space Agency, that she was a big boss at NASA, that they would love to have her expertise for the Russian space program. And it seems that she's been sidelined a little bit, and she gets kind of like a weekly meeting, maybe, or a monthly meeting, and that's it. And even, one of her handlers kind of remarked to her saying, "What could you help with? All this technology is new. You don't know anything about like what's happening now, right? Like all your knowledge was historical." Which is probably very true, and also a very good lesson for people that are thinking of migrating to a different country and committing espionage on a full-time basis.
Caveat, Films and Stuff does not condone committing espionage.
No, indeed not. All right. So which character, which storyline caught your attention in episode 1 or 2?
At the end of episode 1, I took some notes and I made some, let's say, educated guesses as to what I thought was going to be the character arc or story arc of the entire season.
Okay.
I don't think I needed to do that because episode 2 kind of spelled it out very clearly. So my prediction at the end of episode 1 was, oh, you know what they're going to do? I think the season 4 arc is going to be a class warfare thing on Mars, where you're going to have the haves versus the have-nots. Mm-hmm. And then episode 2 really clearly spelled it out when you see that oil rig worker or drill worker go to Mars. And he's like, wait a minute, we don't get to live on the surface? Oh, this is the slop we're eating, whereas everyone else is eating like veal and, beef stroganoff and all these other fancy foods or whatever it was, or pasta with truffle oil. I think that's where this season's arc is going to be. I think it's going to be a class struggle between the astronauts and the workers.
Yeah.
And I think it's also very deliberate that the North Koreans have their base in the basement along with the workers. I think that that's going to be like them working in secret to undermine the facility, kind of like, we're communists too, so we're going to work as, for the people.
Yeah.
So that's where I think it's going. I think that's going to be the A plot that's eventually going to become, where they're going to eventually have to kind of quell the rebellion, as it were, or work together because some other kind of catastrophe is going to happen. Because right now it looks like the A plot is Mars needs to become profitable. If Mars isn't profitable, they're going to shut down this entire thing.
I thought one of the great things that I saw in episode 1 was the asteroid. They always do a little bit of CGI, but it looks kind of, cool and realistic. And I thought that was very interesting, the way that they kind of like use the ropes and they tried to tie it up. Although when that was happening, I was like, this is never going to hold. But anyway, I kind of thought that there was going to be an issue when everyone kept talking about bonuses or on time or deliverables. It was very corporate speak in terms of what they had to do. Like it really seemed like there were quotas and everybody seemed to be only in this for the money. Previously, you saw everyone was like a huge space junkie. And now you see people just basically saying, oh, this pays really well, I'll do it. Oh, it's a 2-year commitment. Doesn't matter. It pays really well. I'll do it. Hyper focused on their milestones or what they needed to do to kind of like earn their bonuses. And I'm like, oh, I see this is, I don't know how, but this is somehow going to be like a recipe for disaster, because there's no way that they would have mentioned this in 3 or 4 different conversations if it wasn't going to be something.
And it was included in that montage, right? Where we see the new project director for NASA is this ex-CEO of Chevrolet, I think it was, or one of the car companies, where he's like, we turned around the car industry, so we're going to do the same for the space industry. Yeah. And you're just like, no, but that's, like you can't make this a company or a corporation. Yeah. And then, of course, we, not to count him out, we both know Dev's going to come back with his robot company, right? Yeah. They made a point of that in the montage because that was his next big thing, is now he's in the robot. And then in episode 2, we see that what they're doing with the robots. That could be an interesting thing where maybe that's what gets the astronauts to unite and work in tandem with the workers, is that the robots come in as a part of cost cutting, and then they go berserk, and it's kind of like a Skynet kind of situation where all of humanity on there is threatened because of these robots. we're now getting into that early 2000s sci-fi phase or real world phase. So there is going to be a lot of more traditional sci-fi elements of storylines coming into play. That's
You're
my
right.
feeling.
You're right on that, but something else has to happen because there's always multiple storylines.
Yeah,
Where do you think Margot's going to fit into this?
that's a great question.
They could have written her off very easily, but the fact that they've paid a good bit of attention to her so far, to me, somehow means that she's going to really get involved in the mix of this.
Yeah, and I think that they made that clear, right? Because she gets connected to that spy
Yeah.
who's like, well, you got to wait for spring. Your place could come into play, right? I think what's going to happen is that the current leadership of Russia is going to have like a mini revolt or a revolutionary or something at Roscosmos. And I think she's going to take over. I think she's going to take over. And I think that's when the Americans are going to learn that, holy crap, she's alive and she's a traitor.
I can't wait for that moment because that's a double holy crap moment, right?
Yeah.
The holy crap she's alive and the holy crap she works for Russia now.
Yeah. And I think that's going to be what gets Alita back on track. I'm
so
not a big
annoying
fan of
though.
this PTSD thing that she's going through right now.
No.
That's not to say that PTSD isn't real. It's very important. And we all...
Films and stuff acknowledges PTSD is real. Yes.
But in terms of a plot device, not the most compelling thing.
You know, I really feel like I haven't liked Alita for this entire show. And it's not the actress. It's not. They've really given her like crap to work with. She's always got a problem. She's always got an attitude or something wrong. They've never really made her the genius that we should be appreciating her for. There's always something with her. I feel like it's super disappointing. If I were her, I'd really be disappointed that like, why am I always having like some problems or issues? Why can't I just be recognized for being this unparalleled genius? Why can't I be recognized for just being extraordinarily good at what I do? Why does there always have to be an issue with my dad or my citizenship? Why can't she just be super, super good at what she does? And now the same thing. It would have been great that we say like she's put everything behind her. She's like you know, a very seasoned, you know, director at NASA. She's got her own, you know, crew. She's got her own team and blah, blah, blah. Instead, it's like, oh, one bad thing goes wrong and suddenly she's losing it. She's having panic attacks. She's sitting at home, staring aimlessly. Like, I agree, this Margot thing is probably going to get her back out of her shell, but it's just so annoying that they always have to kind of diminish her because it makes her very, very unlikable as a character. The same thing with Kelly. Kelly is the most annoying character. Why?
I didn't like her in season 3, and I'm not liking her in season 4 so far.
In season 3, she played such a bizarre, like the whole idea of her getting pregnant, I thought was just so berserk, given how historically mild-mannered and she was always a bookworm or like a nerd, right? She was so never reckless. The person. Yeah.
It's just not a NASA thing to be that reckless. You already had Ed, who was kind of like the firebrand. He was the guy who was like the cowboy in space.
Yeah.
His daughter wasn't supposed to also be that. And to do that with a Russian, it just, it just didn't make sense.
It basically took her out of the narrative of this whole story.
I don't know. For me, it made me respect her less, that someone who was supposed to be this biologist, this scientist, who was supposed to be this super smart, super rational person would do that.
I agree. It's just so frustrating. It would have been more interesting if she would have fallen in love with someone and she would have said, look, I just don't want to be on Mars anymore. She went to Earth. She followed like Karen's footsteps instead. And then she takes over Helios, for example, for her mom after her mom dies. And then it's Kelly versus NASA, right?
And man, if you wanted to find a way to get her own home, get her sick in space. And they're like, we don't have the surgical options here. So we got to send her home now, or, you know, we can't take out her appendix. I'm being specious, obviously not. But, you know, something like that. where we're
Yeah.
just like, if she doesn't get home on the next rocket, she's not going to make it.
You know what? That's a really great idea. Like, it would have been cool if you would have seen her for a few episodes, like pushing through when she's obviously sick, and maybe she's like peeing blood or puking blood, or like, she's sweating all the time. She's making some mistakes in the lab. Everyone's kind of covering for her, but not really. And then you find out that she's got like some thing that's like dramatically causing her to not be able to continue living in space, right? She's got to go down. Her mom dies. Maybe she takes over Helios, or maybe she takes like a position in NASA where she's got to like manage Ed somehow. But the way that they took her out of it, I thought was just really blah.
For a show that was so good about empowering women like properly, this seemed like such a step backwards.
Kelly and Aleda totally got railroaded. Danielle, they treat Danielle very well, though, by the way.
Incredibly so. And for good reason. Like, even just as an actor, fantastic. As a character, even better.
Yeah. Margot remains to be seen. And that's why when we were talking about who we're missing, I mean, if you think about who was in that initial class of potential astronauts, season 1. Remember, season 1, it was about, hey, we're going to send a woman. It was Ellen. Okay, she had a great story arc. Of course, she was president-elect twice. Tracy died heroically, but she's out. Molly died heroically, but she's out. We haven't really filled that void.
And that's the thing. I think we're going to see Ellen come back in a big way. I don't know how, but I expect her to come back. Forget about the lack of powerful women, just the lack of powerful characters. I think we need to see Ellen come back. I expect that Marco is going to take a much more prominent role in, episodes 4 onwards, or 3 onwards, whatever
that seems right.
Is. Aleda is going to get stronger at the presence of Margot, because I think the two of them working against each other, that to me is a very compelling thing, especially if now Aleda is going to be private sector. That I think could be very interesting.
It's shocking that we're at the beginning of the 4th season and there's not another female character that they've really developed.
Or another male character, period. We haven't really seen anyone new. We've seen the only one that they've spent a little bit of time with was this new Earth worker, Miles.
Yeah.
Right? I think his name was Miles. Whatever his name was.
Yeah.
And again, the class warfare thing could be interesting.
Yeah.
But right now, not a very compelling story. It could get better, but I'm just not feeling it at the moment.
I felt they tried to do that with Dev, but Dev did not have, I think, the right charisma for me to really buy into his kind of like collective identity, and the fact that, I felt no sympathy for him after he was, pushed out of Helios.
Well, speaking of which, I think Dev's going to come back in a big way too.
I think Dev is going to come back because we need more characters. I mean, you and I have been saying this probably since season 2.
Yeah.
We're just not developing, right? They had Danny for a while. Okay.
One caveat, I think, is that we're only 2 episodes deep. We still have another 8 to go. So that's fair enough. Here's a potential hot take. I think Danny and Ed are going to end up working on an alliance together, and I think they're going to end up working together. We don't know where Danny is right now. We don't know if he's on Earth. We don't know if he's on Mars. We have no idea where he is.
I know what you're going to say, but tell me why. I think it's because when we saw Danielle at that party, remember she was kind of like washing the dishes or something, and then she saw like that photo of Danny, and the look on her face was like, she has not gotten over that anger, justifiably so. But that, to me, telegraphed like he's coming back in a big way.
Yeah.
There's no way they would have made that emphasis on her seeing that photo unless they were trying to set it up for there's bad blood.
And again, kudos to her as an actor. She portrayed that perfectly. You could tell she was still not happy with how that went down.
I mean, I would guess that he's at home, given the discipline that he had, and given the amount of time that's passed between seasons 3 and 4, I would guess that he's back on Earth. And he's either going to be hired by Dev and go private sector because no one will touch him at NASA, or
What if Margot tries to get him from Russia?
it's not bad. That's so good because he's got to be like probably doing something where he's like just sitting on a sofa, just like Gordo was for a while, right?
Yeah.
Fat, drunk, lazy, demotivated, and just like all characters down in their luck in this show, it happens time and time again. That random phone call comes and says, even though you're absolutely not the most qualified person for this job, I'm offering it to you so that we can write you back into the story, right?
Yeah. Or you're a known quantity. You've actually been
Yep.
up there.
Yeah.
You know where the pistol is hidden. You know what I mean? You know what I mean?
Maybe it's Marco, I think, is a very good hot take. That's an exceptional hot take, by the way.
That could be an interesting play where she's just like, all right, well, if I'm back and leading this, I need some known quantities working for us on the sly. Let's get him up there. Let's do something there.
Not bad. I have to say, Pete, that's pretty clever of you. I wouldn't have guessed that.
Who knows? I mean, at this point, it's still early enough in the season that we can start throwing stuff at the wall. I think they've already clearly telegraphed that the North Koreans are going to somehow be involved as being bad guys or being belligerents in some kind of civil war on Mars.
Yeah.
This new project director of NASA is going to make a rookie error because he's going to treat it like a factory for cars rather than as like a scientific endeavor, which it should be.
All right. Big take. Who's the next person to die?
Ed. I think Ed goes at the end of the season.
I agree. It has to be. I think it has to be Ed because he's had such a career arc, and he also seems to have a little bit of a death wish. For him, he kind of seems to want to die in space just because he's now had like so much tragedy in his life. You know, his son died, Karen died. It seems that he's just so lonely and despondent about what he's done. And he can't imagine, like, he definitely does not want to come to Earth. We're going to start to see a little bit of like.
That's exactly right. You know what? I think that could be it. I think Danny might be in like space jail in Mars somewhere.
Yeah.
Something happens on the space station that requires like some kind of act of dare. He's going to go out there with Danny's help. For all his faults, he's still going to see Gordo and Danny. And at the very last moment, he's going to save Danny by sacrificing himself or something.
Yeah. So I think after watching the first 2 episodes, it definitely has the same vibe this season that it had prior seasons. I'm equally excited for everything coming up. The criticism I have, I've had it for 3 seasons, so have you. We don't have enough people, and that was true in season 3, and now it's really true in season 4. Unless we develop some people or have a really big event, the number of storylines that we can really comment on have been dramatically reduced.
Yeah. I expect that 1 or 2 of these next coming episodes will focus more on that crew of workers in the basement. They could be the next group of story-focused people.
But I feel like that's a very Silo-esque storyline.
Yeah, look, again, we're 2 episodes in. It's hard to kind of
let's not overreact.
Next. Some things are a little bit more obvious. I think, by the end of this season, there's going to be a couple of like near misses in terms of the funding. And then potentially Dev comes in and privatizes the entire thing with his robotics company and buys the entire project off of NASA. Who knows? That could be another way to go.
Let's watch, episode 3, and let's talk about it next week and see where we are.
Let's watch 3. Let's watch a couple more. Maybe we can do like a mid-season
recap.
And then see where we are and then update our theories and projections for where the season's going.
Listeners, tell us what you think. Are you as enthusiastic about this show as Pete and I have always been? Any other great guesses or theories? The crazier, the better. Let's hear what you've got.
Reach out to us. Let us know what you think. Tweet at us at F&S Podcast. DM us on Instagram at Films and Stuff Podcast. email us, aloha at filmsandstuffpodcast.com, or the best thing you can do, like this video, leave a comment below, subscribe to our channel, hit that bell so that when the next episode of the Films and Stuff podcast drops, you'll be the first to know.
Listeners, appreciate your time and attention and contributions. Pete, as always, your prognostications and crystal ballness is much appreciated.
Thanks, Ethan. Thanks, everyone.
See you next week on the Films and Stuff podcast. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Films and Stuff. If you haven't already, please subscribe and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever podcasts are downloaded. Films and Stuff. There is no substitute.